7 in the morning, and I'm standing on my porch in pajamas and rubber boots, watching some yellow excavator tear down the fence between my property and the public park. The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with wet pine needles burned my nostrils. Behind the controls sat a figure in a hard hat, and nearby, under an umbrella, stood Karen Henderson with her twin sister Sarah, both wearing identical yellow rain jackets like some kind of coordinated assault team. "Emergency safety work!" Karen shouted over the grinding metal and concrete. She waved some official-looking permit in the air. The machine's hydraulics hissed as another section of my fence crumbled into rubble. $15,000. That's what I'd spent 3 years paying off for that fence. Now they were turning it into gravel in my backyard. Drones caught structural damage. Imminent collapse risk. Karen's voice cut through the morning air. Her sister Sarah nodded along, filming everything on her phone. The permit fluttered in her grip, but from where I stood, something about that document looked off. The ink seemed too fresh, the edges too crisp for paperwork that supposedly came from last week. I took a step forward, coffee still steaming in my hand. "Hold on there, Karen. Nobody told me about any emergency work." She pulled out her tablet, fingers flying across the screen. "Mr. Davis, according to Homeowners Association emergency protocols, we don't need individual consent when public safety is at risk." She pointed at a chunk of concrete. "See those cracks? One strong wind, and this whole thing could have come down on the playground." The excavator operator killed the engine. In the sudden quiet, I could hear Sarah's phone camera still recording. Karen held up a blue folder, thick with papers. "Engineering assessment from last week. Your fence posed an immediate threat to community property. You're liable for $8,000 in remediation costs, or we file suit for damages to public infrastructure." I stared at the so-called engineering report. The signature looked legitimate, but the official seal was smudged, almost like someone had pressed it while the ink was still wet. Karen's eyes had that hunting gleam I'd seen before, the look she got right before demolishing someone at a homeowners association meeting. "This is insane," I said. "That fence was solid yesterday." "Yesterday, we didn't have professional drone footage documenting the integrity failures." Sarah stepped forward, her phone still pointing at me. "This is all being recorded for insurance purposes, Mr. Davis. I hope you understand we're trying to protect everyone here." The twins exchanged a look. Something passed between them, some silent communication that made my gut twist. I'd lived in this neighborhood for 12 years, and I'd never seen Karen move this fast on anything. Usually, getting the Homeowners Association to approve a mailbox change took 3 months and 2 committee meetings. But overnight emergency demolition, with contractors and permits already in place? My neighbor Frank peered over his back fence, shaking his head with sympathy. Other faces appeared at windows along the street. By tomorrow morning, this would be the talk of every coffee shop in town. Karen tucked the tablet under her arm. "We'll need that $8,000 within 72 hours, Jim. The contractors need payment, and the association voted to hold property owners responsible for emergency safety violations." "What vote? When?" "Emergency session. Last night." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Sometimes decisive action is necessary to protect our community values." The excavator coughed back to life. More of my fence disappeared into twisted metal and broken concrete. I watched 3 years of work vanish in minutes, and all I could think about was that fresh ink on Karen's permit and the way she'd said decisive action, like she'd been practicing the phrase. Have you ever felt like you're watching your life get demolished in real time, and everyone's acting like it's perfectly normal? That was my Tuesday morning, and Karen Henderson was just getting started. The coffee in my hand had gone cold by the time the excavator finally rumbled away. Karen and Sarah stood surveying the wreckage like generals inspecting a successful battle. Chunks of my fence lay scattered across the grass, mixed with mud and torn sod where the machine had chewed up my lawn. "The cleanup crew will be here this afternoon," Karen announced, making notes on her tablet. "Of course, that's an additional $1,200 for debris removal, standard rate." I set my coffee mug down on the porch railing harder than I meant to. "Let me get this straight. You destroy my property, then charge me to clean up the mess?" Sarah lowered her phone, but kept recording. "It's not destruction, Mr. Davis. It's emergency hazard mitigation. The engineering report clearly states—" "I want to see that report." I stepped down into the muddy grass. "The real one. not some printout you wave around. Karen's jaw tightened. She hugged the blue folder closer to her chest. The technical details are available through proper channels. You can file a formal request with the association. Formal request for a report about my own fence? The former fence, Sarah corrected. Technically, once it posed a public safety hazard, it became community concern rather than private property. The twins had this routine down pat. Karen played the authority figure, while Sarah handled documentation and legal-sounding phrases. They finished each other's sentences like they'd rehearsed this conversation. Frank's back door slammed. He walked over carrying a steaming mug, his old work boots squelching in the wet ground. "Morning, Jim. Hell of a wake-up call." He nodded toward the Henderson sisters. "Ladies?" Karen straightened her shoulders. "Mr. Collins, we're handling an emergency safety situation. The Homeowners Association appreciates your understanding." "Oh, I understand plenty." Frank took a slow sip of his coffee, studying the destruction. "Funny thing, though, I walk my dog past this fence every morning. Never noticed any cracks or structural problems." His eyes moved to Karen's folder. "When exactly did this engineering inspection happen?" "Last Tuesday," Sarah said immediately. "Tuesday morning," Karen added. "Professional assessment by certified structural engineers." Frank nodded thoughtfully. "Tuesday morning, that's interesting, because Tuesday morning I was right here helping Jim patch a small hole in his sprinkler system. We worked on this side of the fence for about 2 hours. He pointed at where the fence used to be. Solid as a rock, even commented on what good shape it was in. The silence stretched long enough to hear a crow cawing in the distance. Karen's grip on her folder tightened. "Visual inspection from ground level isn't the same as professional drone analysis, Mr. Collins. The structural damage was internal, not immediately apparent to untrained observation." "Internal damage." Frank repeated the phrase like he was tasting something sour. "In a 3-year-old fence." Sarah raised her phone again. "This conversation is being recorded for association records. Any interference with emergency safety protocols will be reported to the appropriate authorities." That's when it hit me, the smell of fresh concrete dust. My fence had been solid wood and metal posts, but scattered in the rubble, I could see chunks of concrete that looked too clean, too recently broken, like someone had brought concrete specifically to create structural damage for the cameras. Frank noticed it too. He kicked at a piece of concrete near his feet. "Jim, what kind of foundation did you pour for this fence?" "Wood posts, metal brackets, no concrete anywhere." Karen started walking toward her Honda Pilot. "Gentlemen, the emergency work is complete. Mr. Davis, you'll receive an invoice by 5 p.m. today. Payment is due within 72 hours, or the association will file for emergency assessment against your property." Sarah followed her sister, still filming. "The cleanup crew arrives at 2. Please have the area accessible." They drove off, leaving Frank and me standing in my demolished backyard. The morning sun broke through the clouds, highlighting the destruction in harsh detail. "Jim," Frank said quietly, "that concrete didn't come from your fence." I picked up a chunk of the mystery concrete. Fresh breaks, clean edges. Someone had brought this stuff here specifically to create evidence of structural failure. But the question that made my stomach drop wasn't how they'd done it. It was how long they'd been planning it. By noon, the invoice arrived, hand-delivered by some kid on a bike who couldn't have been older than 16, $23,000, emergency demolition, hazard assessment, debris removal, administrative fees, and something called community safety restoration costs. I stared at the paper until the numbers blurred. My savings account had $28,000. This would wipe me out. The itemized list read like fiction. Structural engineering assessment, $4,000. Emergency contractor mobilization, $8,000. Hazard mitigation, $6,000. Each line item precisely calculated to sound official while bleeding me dry. Frank knocked on my kitchen door around 1 o'clock. "Jim, you need to see this." He handed me his phone. Facebook post from Karen Henderson, posted 2 hours ago. "Protecting our community when neighbors put property over safety." Below the text, a photo of my demolished fence with dramatic angles that made the concrete chunks look like massive structural failures. The comments were already rolling in. "Thank God someone's watching out for our kids. How irresponsible can you get?" Sue him for endangering the whole neighborhood. 47 likes and climbing. Sarah Henderson had shared it to 3 local community groups. Gets worse, Frank said, scrolling down. Look at the parent chat for Riverside Elementary. Screenshot after screenshot. My name, my address, and increasingly hostile comments about that dangerous neighbor who put our children at risk. Someone had started a thread called Legal Action Against Jim Davis, with 12 replies in the first hour. My wife Emma called at 2:30. Her voice was tight, controlled. Jim, my supervisor, just asked me about some safety incident at our house. Apparently someone from the school board called the hospital asking about my family's community standing. The cleanup crew showed up right on schedule. 3 guys in matching shirts from KH Construction, the same company that had done the demolition. They worked fast, loading debris into a truck with military efficiency. I walked over to the crew chief, a weathered guy in his 50s. This is some operation you've got here. He glanced up from his clipboard. Standard emergency cleanup, sir. We get the call, we handle it. Mind me asking how long you've been working with the homeowners association? The guy's face went carefully neutral. First time, actually. Got the contract yesterday. Rush job, but the money's good. He lowered his voice. Between you and me, though, this seems like overkill for some fence repairs. I've seen actual structural collapses that required less heavy equipment. Yesterday, the association only voted on this last night. That's not what I was told. He looked confused, checking his paperwork. My invoice shows the work order was placed 3 days ago. 3 days before the emergency vote. 3 days before the supposed engineering inspection. 3 days before anyone claimed my fence was dangerous. The crew chief realized he'd said too much. Look, sir, I just followed the work orders. Don't know nothing about the politics. He walked away, shouting directions to his workers. By 5 p.m., my backyard was clean, empty. Like the fence had never existed. The grass was torn up, the ground churned to mud, but every piece of evidence was gone, loaded onto trucks and hauled away to wherever inconvenient debris disappears. Emma came home to find me sitting on the back porch, staring at the empty space where our privacy used to be. She set down her purse and sat beside me without a word. They're calling for my resignation, she finally said. Not directly, just suggestions that my family situation might compromise my judgment at work. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. 20 years building my reputation at that hospital. 20 years of perfect reviews and community service. And Karen Henderson can destroy it with one Facebook post. The sun was setting behind the trees. In the distance, kids played on the park equipment that my fence had supposedly threatened. Their laughter carried across the empty yard, innocent of the adult calculations that had torn down our barrier to their world. Jim, Emma said quietly, maybe we should just pay, cut our losses and move on. I thought about the concrete chunks that didn't belong, the work order placed before the emergency vote, the practice coordination between Karen and Sarah, the way they'd filmed everything like they needed evidence for something bigger than a simple fence removal. No, I said, this isn't about the money anymore. Emma squeezed my hand. Then what's it about? I watched the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, the Henderson sisters were probably planning their next move, but they'd made one mistake. They thought I'd roll over and pay like a good neighbor should. They were about to learn otherwise. Thursday morning brought Inspector Rodriguez to my door, 40-something, tired eyes, and a metal clipboard that had seen better days. The smell of coffee and tobacco clung to his jacket like he'd been working since dawn. Mr. Davis, I'm with the United States Postal Service. We need to talk about drone operations in your neighborhood. I poured him coffee while he spread maps across my kitchen table. Red dots marked delivery routes. Timestamps noted flight patterns. Every morning, 6:47 to 7:23 a.m., the same path through our subdivision. Your house is checkpoint 7, Rodriguez explained, tapping the map. We've been testing drone delivery to hard-to-reach areas for 6 months. Never had a single complaint. He looked up from his paperwork. Until Tuesday. Tuesday morning, right when my fence got demolished. 6 formal complaints filed within 1 hour, all identical language, different handwriting. He pulled out a stack of forms. Noise violations, safety concerns, invasion of privacy. Textbook harassment pattern, if you ask me. I studied the complaints, different pens, different paper, but the phrases matched like someone had dictated them. Coordinated effort. It gets stranger. The complaints reference specific flight times and altitudes that aren't in our public notices. Someone had inside information about our operations. Rodriguez sipped his coffee, watching me carefully. Any idea who might want to shut down postal drone service in your area? Frank appeared at my back door, holding up his phone. Jim, you need to see the latest from our friendly neighborhood association. Karen's newest Facebook post featured professional photographs of the demolished fence site, high-resolution images showing concrete fragments, structural damage assessments, and detailed captions about prompt community action preventing tragedy. But Rodriguez leaned forward, studying the photos. When were these taken? Posted this morning, Frank said. No, I mean, when were they actually taken? Rodriguez pulled out a magnifying glass from his jacket. Look at the shadows. Sun angle's all wrong for morning light. These were shot yesterday afternoon, but they show damage that supposedly occurred Tuesday. The pieces clicked together in my head. They staged the photos after the demolition. More than that. Rodriguez pointed to one image. See this concrete chunk? It's positioned against that tree stump. But in our drone footage from yesterday, that same stump was clear. Someone moved debris around to create more dramatic shots. Emma walked into the kitchen, still in her scrubs from the night shift. Any good news in this mess? Rodriguez closed his files. Depends how you define good news. The Postal Service doesn't back down from complaints without investigation, especially when those complaints might be fraudulent. He stood, leaving his card on the table. I'll be in town for a few more days, gathering evidence. After he left, Frank and I walked the perimeter where my fence used to stand. In daylight, the deception was obvious. Tire tracks from heavy equipment led not just to the demolition site, but to 3 other locations around the neighborhood. Someone had used that excavator for more than emergency fence removal. They're planning something bigger, Frank said. Your fence was just the beginning. The mail truck arrived at 11. Jerry, our regular carrier for 8 years, looked confused as he sorted through packages. Jim, I got delivery notices for addresses that don't match the houses. Someone's been redirecting mail to a P.O. box downtown. Whose mail? Yours mostly, plus 3 other families on this street. All the redirects were filed Monday. Jerry scratched his head. But nobody told me about any address changes. Monday, the day before the emergency fence demolition. The day before anyone claimed my fence was dangerous. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Hospital administrator wants to meet tomorrow. Concerns about community relations affecting workplace environment. Jim, they're going after my job now. I stared at the message until the screen went dark. $23,000, my reputation, Emma's career, and our mail service. The Henderson sisters weren't just targeting me anymore. They were dismantling my entire life, piece by piece. But Rodriguez had given me something Karen didn't expect. A federal ally with subpoena power and a very dim view of Postal Service interference. Time to turn the tables. Friday brought Karen's lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman in her 30s who set up shop in the Hendersons' driveway like she owned the neighborhood. By 10 a.m., she was knocking on doors with official papers and a smile that never reached her eyes. Mr. Davis? She introduced herself as Lisa Connor, attorney for the Homeowners Association. I'm here regarding your outstanding emergency assessment, $23,000 plus accrued interest and administrative fees. The interest had somehow grown the bill to $31,000 in 3 days. You have 48 hours to remit payment, or we initiate property lien procedures. Connor handed me a thick envelope. The association voted to authorize all necessary legal remedies to protect community assets. I opened the envelope. Inside, an itemized breakdown that made my head spin. Late fees, processing charges, legal consultation costs, and something called emergency action surety bonds. Each line item calculated to precision, each dollar amount designed to drain my savings completely. What if I dispute the original assessment? Connor's smile widened. Disputes require a $5,000 deposit to initiate formal review. Non-refundable, regardless of outcome. She closed her briefcase with a sharp click. The association recommends swift compliance to minimize additional fees. Emma called during lunch break. Her voice was hollow, defeated. They're transferring me to night shift in the emergency department, indefinite reassignment due to workflow concerns. She paused. Jim, the night shift pays $8,000 less per year. We can't afford the mortgage in this legal mess. That's when I made my first real mistake. I got angry. I drove straight to the Henderson house and pounded on their door until Karen appeared, flanked by her sister Sarah, both wearing matching green cardigans like some kind of suburban uniform. You want to destroy my wife's career over a fence? You want to bankrupt us with fake emergency fees? I stepped closer, close enough to see Karen flinch. Game on. Mr. Davis, you're trespassing on private property, Sarah said, raising her phone to record, and making verbal threats against association officers. Threats? I haven't started making threats yet. That's when I saw Karen smile, really smile, for the first time since this whole mess began. She'd been waiting for me to lose control, to give her exactly the footage she needed. Thank you, Karen said sweetly. That was perfect. The video was online within an hour. Dangerous neighbor threatens community leaders. Edited to show me advancing on two frightened women, my voice raised, my body language aggressive. The context was gone, but the optics were damning. The comments came fast and vicious. Call the police on this psycho. No wonder his fence was dangerous if this is how he handles problems. Emma Davis should be ashamed of her husband. By evening, 3 more neighbors had posted doorbell camera footage showing me walking angrily to the Henderson house. Perfectly legal behavior transformed into a menacing narrative through careful editing and inflammatory captions. Rodriguez called at 8 p.m. Jim, I need you to stay away from the Henderson sisters. They've filed a restraining order petition citing harassment and intimidation. Rodriguez, they're destroying my life with fake bills and fraudulent complaints. I believe you, but now they have video evidence of aggressive behavior. A judge might grant temporary protection, and that kills our investigation. I need you to be the victim here, not the aggressor. Emma came home to find me sitting in our dark living room, laptop open, watching the video of my meltdown loop endlessly on social media, 47 shares in the first hour. Jim, she sat beside me, taking my hand. Maybe it's time to cut our losses. They planned this, every step, the fence demolition, the fake engineering report, the fraudulent mail complaints. They manipulated me into losing my temper so they'd have ammunition. And it worked. Emma's voice was quiet, resigned. Your anger gave them exactly what they needed to justify everything they've done. I closed the laptop and looked at my wife. 26 years of marriage, and I'd never seen her look so tired. Dark circles under her eyes, stress lines that hadn't been there a week ago. Karen Henderson was winning, and we both knew it. There's got to be a way to fight back. Emma squeezed my hand. Sometimes fighting back just makes things worse. Outside, a car door slammed. Through the window, I could see Karen Henderson standing in her driveway, talking on the phone. Even from a distance, her body language radiated satisfaction. She'd gotten me to play her game by her rules. And now she was going in for the kill. Saturday morning, Rodriguez showed up at my door with a federal briefcase and a grim expression. Jim, we need to talk, and this time, I'm recording everything. He spread new documents across my kitchen table, Postal Service flight logs, GPS coordinates, and something that made my heart skip, high-resolution aerial photographs taken by the delivery drone every morning for 6 months. Your fence wasn't the target, Rodriguez said, pointing to a series of images. Look at these dates, March 15th, April 22nd, May 8th. Every time our drone flew over this neighborhood, it photographed the same thing. I leaned closer. In photo after photo, clear as daylight, Karen and Sarah Henderson systematically blocking mail delivery routes with temporary barriers. Orange cones, construction horses, even parked cars positioned to obstruct federal postal access. They were interfering with mail service for months. But here's the interesting part. Rodriguez flipped to newer photos. 3 weeks ago, they stopped the interference and started something else. The recent images showed Karen meeting with contractors, Sarah directing equipment placement, and both sisters examining fence lines throughout the neighborhood. Not just my fence, 7 different properties. This isn't about your fence, Jim. It's about federal postal access rights. Your fence was blocking their view of postal operations, so they eliminated it. But they needed a legal justification that wouldn't expose their mail interference. Rodriguez pulled out his phone and showed me a text message chain he'd obtained through federal subpoena. Messages between Karen Henderson and someone identified as KH Construction Kevin. K, the postal inspector is asking questions about the drone complaints. Stick to the plan, emergency safety narrative, no mention of mail access issues. What if he finds the blockade photos? He won't, all evidence disposed of after fence removal. I read the messages twice, blood pounding in my ears. They knew about your investigation before they demolished my fence. Gets better. Kevin Henderson is Karen's cousin. He runs KH Construction. Rodriguez smiled grimly. The same company that did your emergency demolition and charged $23,000 for what should have cost $4,000. Family business. Federal mail fraud and conspiracy charges if we can prove coordination. But I need more evidence, and they've been careful to communicate mostly in person. Rodriguez packed up his documents. That's where you come in. Me, after yesterday's disaster, I can't get within 100 yards of Karen Henderson. No, but you can do something else. Rodriguez handed me a small device that looked like a garage door opener. Postal Service emergency beacon. If you're in immediate danger related to federal mail service interference, press the button. Every postal inspector in the tri-state area gets an alert with your GPS coordinates. What kind of danger are we talking about? Rodriguez's expression hardened. The kind that happens when people realize a federal investigation could send them to prison for mail fraud conspiracy. That afternoon, Kevin Henderson called me directly. His voice was shaky, nervous. Mr. Davis, this is Kevin from KH Construction. We need to talk about your fence situation. We met at the coffee shop on Main Street. Kevin was a thin man in his late 30s, work-worn hands that couldn't stop fidgeting with his coffee cup. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Look, Jim, I'm in a bad spot here. Karen promised me steady work with the Homeowners Association if I helped with this fence thing. But now there's a federal postal inspector asking questions, and I've got 3 kids to feed. What exactly did Karen ask you to do? Kevin glanced around the coffee shop, then leaned closer. Create evidence? She wanted photos showing structural damage, debris that looked dangerous, documentation that would justify emergency demolition. He pulled out his phone, showing me images I'd never seen before. These are the real before photos. Your fence was solid. We had to weaken it artificially to create the cracks for her engineering report. The photos showed Karen and Sarah taking turns with a sledgehammer, systematically damaging perfectly good fence posts. Timestamps proved the damage was inflicted the morning of the demolition, hours before any supposed engineering inspection. Kevin, this is fraud, criminal fraud. I know, his voice cracked. But Karen said it was just neighborhood politics. She never mentioned federal investigators or postal service interference. Now she wants me to do the same thing to 3 more properties, and if I refuse, she'll report my work as substandard and kill my business reputation. He slid a manila envelope across the table. These are the real engineering reports, the actual structural assessments Karen had done 6 months ago. Every fence in the neighborhood, including yours, all rated as structurally sound with decades of remaining life. I opened the envelope. Professional letterhead, certified engineer signatures, and detailed analyses proving Karen had known all along that no fences posed any safety risks. She'd manufactured the entire emergency. Why are you telling me this? Kevin's hands shook as he reached for his coffee. Because yesterday, Karen told me the postal inspector was getting too close. She wants me to create an accident, something that would justify shutting down drone operations permanently and discredit any federal investigation. The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm, too crowded. What kind of accident? The kind that hurts people, Jim. The kind that makes federal investigators go away. Kevin stood up, leaving the envelope on the table. I'm not that guy. I won't hurt innocent people for Karen Henderson's schemes. I watched him walk away, shoulders hunched with guilt and fear. The manila envelope felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Karen Henderson wasn't just running a neighborhood scam anymore. She was planning something that could get people killed. Sunday morning, 6:45 a.m. I stood in my backyard with Rodriguez, both of us watching the postal drone make its normal delivery run, the smell of coffee and morning dew mixed with the distant hum of machinery. "She'll make her move today," Rodriguez said, adjusting his radio. "Kevin Henderson's testimony gave us enough for federal charges, but we need to catch her in the act." The drone completed its route and disappeared over the tree line. In the distance, I could see Karen and Sarah Henderson emerging from their house, both carrying equipment bags and walking with purpose toward the park. "Jim, remember the plan? You're just a concerned neighbor documenting suspicious activity. Don't confront them directly. Don't give them any excuse to claim harassment." I activated the video recording on my phone and followed the sisters at a distance. They set up near the playground equipment, directly under the drone's flight path. Sarah unpacked what looked like professional photography gear, while Karen assembled some kind of metal framework. That's when I saw what Kevin had been too afraid to describe. A device designed to interfere with drone navigation. Bright strobing lights pointed skyward, radio frequency jammers, and what appeared to be a net launcher aimed at the flight corridor. They weren't just planning to disrupt postal service. They were planning to bring down a federal aircraft. Karen checked her watch. 6 minutes until the next pass. Sarah, start recording when I give the signal. What about the backup story? Same as before. Concerned citizens protecting children from dangerous drone operations. We'll claim the equipment malfunctioned and caused an accidental crash. Karen's voice carried clearly across the morning air. The postal inspector will have to suspend all flights pending investigation. Problem solved. I pressed the emergency beacon Rodriguez had given me and kept recording. Sarah raised her camera as the familiar hum of the approaching drone grew louder. Karen activated her interference device, sending chaotic strobe lights dancing across the playground. The drone immediately began erratic flight patterns, its navigation systems confused by the electronic assault. "It's working!" Sarah called out. "The drone's losing altitude." That's when Rodriguez appeared with 3 federal agents, emerging from unmarked vehicles positioned around the park. "Federal agents, shut down your equipment immediately." Karen spun around, her face cycling through surprise, anger, and calculation in seconds. "Officers, we're documenting dangerous drone activity threatening our children's safety. You're interfering with federal postal operations and attempting to destroy government property." Rodriguez nodded to his agents, who quickly disabled Karen's interference device. "Sarah Henderson, Karen Henderson, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit federal mail fraud and interference with postal service operations." The drone stabilized and continued its route as if nothing had happened, but Karen wasn't finished yet. "You have no proof of conspiracy. This is just concerned citizens trying to protect their community from reckless government overreach." Even in handcuffs, she maintained her authority voice. "Any charges will be dismissed as federal harassment of local homeowner rights." Rodriguez smiled and pulled out his phone. "Actually, we have 6 months of documented evidence. Postal drone footage showing systematic mail service interference, financial records proving fraudulent billing through your cousin's construction company, and thanks to Kevin Henderson's cooperation, recorded conversations detailing your entire scheme." He played back audio from the surveillance Kevin had agreed to wear. Karen's voice, crystal clear, describing the plan to manufacture fence emergencies, eliminate postal oversight through staged accidents, and leverage federal disruption to seize control of neighborhood property access. The plan was brilliant, Karen. Control the postal access, control the federal oversight, control the oversight, control the neighborhood development rights. You could have made millions converting this area to high-density housing once you eliminated the drone surveillance. Karen's confident mask finally cracked. Kevin wore a wire? Kevin chose federal cooperation over federal prison. Smart choice. Rodriguez signaled to his agents. "Sarah Henderson, Karen Henderson, you're charged with conspiracy to commit mail fraud, interference with federal postal operations, attempted destruction of government property, and criminal conspiracy. Each charge carries up to 20 years in federal prison." The neighborhood had gathered by now. Frank stood with other residents watching the Henderson sisters get loaded into federal vehicles. The same neighbors who'd condemned me on social media now stared in shock as the truth unfolded. Emma arrived just as the federal cars pulled away. She found me sitting on the park bench where my fence used to provide privacy, holding the emergency beacon Rodriguez had given me. "Is it over?" The criminal charges, yes. The homeowners association will be dissolved pending federal investigation. Kevin's testimony showed the whole board was complicit. I looked at the empty space where my fence had been. But rebuilding everything they destroyed, that's going to take time. Rodriguez walked over, removing his badge and sitting beside us. Jim, the federal prosecutor wants to discuss restitution. Karen Henderson's assets will be seized to cover damages. Your fence, Emma's lost wages, legal costs, emotional distress. The government takes care of people who help us catch federal criminals. 3 months later, I stood in the same spot, watching workers install a new fence. Stronger than the old one, with better materials, paid for entirely by federal restitution funds. Emma had been promoted to day shift supervisor with a raise that more than compensated for her lost wages. The postal drone still made its morning runs, but now I waved when it passed over. Rodriguez had given me a small postal service flag to hang by my front door, a reminder that sometimes the federal government actually works the way it's supposed to. Karen Henderson pled guilty to avoid trial. 18 months in federal prison, 5 years probation, and a ban on serving in any homeowner association leadership role. Sarah got 12 months in community service. The neighborhood is quieter now, more respectful. People learned that screaming on social media and filing fraudulent complaints has consequences when federal investigators get involved. But the real lesson? Sometimes the best way to fight a bully isn't to become one yourself. Sometimes you just need to document everything, stay calm, and let the proper authorities handle people who think they're above the law. My fence is stronger now. My marriage survived. Emma's career flourished. And every morning at 6:47, I hear that familiar drone hum and smile. Justice, it turns out, has its own flight pattern.